You think you know a story about a quiet man on the prairie, a man broken by grief, but you don't know this story because some men aren't just broken, they're forged. Out in the Dakota Territory, 1884, the wind doesn't just blow, it whispers. And for Elias Vance, those whispers all sounded like his wife, Hannah. They sounded like his little boy, Thomas. He was a man living in a ghost story of his own making, his homestead a monument to everything he'd lost. The cabin was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that screams. 2 winters. That's how long it had been since the fever took them. 2 winters of chopping wood just to hear a sound that wasn't the blood rushing in his own ears. 2 winters of mending fences that held nothing in and kept nothing out. He spoke more to his mule, old Patience, than he did to any human. Why bother? The folks in the nearby town, Redemption Creek, looked at him sideways. They saw a man drowning in his own sorrow and didn't have the decency to throw him a rope. They just watched. They whispered. The widower, the ghost of the prairie. He only rode into that dusty strip of a town when he had to. Salt, flour, bullets. Each trip was a trial, feeling their pity and their judgment on his back like the biting winter wind. But one day, the town felt different. The usual low grumble was gone, replaced by a sharp, hungry silence. A crowd was gathered, packed tight in the town square, buzzing like flies on a corpse. And in the middle of it all, tied to the hitching post like an animal, was a woman. She was Lakota, young with hair as black as a starless night and a chin held so high it could break. Her hands were bound to the post, but her eyes were free, and they were defiant. Sheriff Callahan stood before her, a man puffed up with his own importance. He was holding a long, black leather whip. "This," he boomed, letting the word hang in the air, "is what we do to thieves in Redemption Creek." He held up a bolt of cheap calico fabric. "Caught red-handed, trying to steal from Mr. Donovan's store." Elias watched from the edge of the crowd. He knew Donovan, a weaselly man who watched the native folk like a hawk, his hand never far from the shotgun he kept under his counter. Elias had lived a lot of life, and he knew a lie when it stank up the air. This stank. The woman said nothing. Her silence was a fortress. Callahan, loving the attention, let a cruel grin spread across his face. "The punishment," he declared, "is 50 lashes, to serve as a lesson." 50. The word hit Elias like a physical blow. 50 lashes would turn her back into a bloody ruin. It wouldn't just break her, it would kill her. He looked at the faces in the crowd, the eager, the hungry, the ones who looked away, ashamed but silent. He saw the whip in Callahan's hand, a sleeping snake ready to strike. And in that moment, he didn't see the woman anymore. He saw Hannah, her body frail, her breath a tiny whisper against the fever. He remembered the rage, the crushing, helpless rage of a man who could do nothing but watch the person he loved be extinguished. He had been powerless then, but he wasn't now. Something inside him that had been dead for 2 years suddenly kicked. It broke out of its cage of grief and sorrow, and it was screaming. Before his mind even caught up, his boots were moving, crunching through the dust. The crowd parted for him like he was a phantom, their whispers dying as he passed. He stopped right in front of the sheriff. His shadow fell across the woman. Callahan turned, his face twisting in annoyance. "Vance, this isn't your business. Go on home." Elias's voice was rusty, like an old hinge, but it was clear. "I'll take it." A confused silence fell over the square. Callahan blinked. "Take what?" "The punishment," Elias said, his eyes locked on the sheriff. "I'll take her lashes." The crowd gasped. It was like he'd said the sky was green. The woman tied to the post twisted her head, her dark eyes wide, searching his face. Why? What was this? For the first time, her proud defiance wavered, replaced by utter confusion. Sheriff Callahan let out a short, barking laugh. "You've been out in that sun too long, Vance. Have you gone insane? Why in God's name would you do that for her?" He waved a hand at the woman like she was nothing. Elias didn't look at her. He couldn't. He couldn't explain the firestorm in his chest, the sudden, desperate need to stand between this casual cruelty and another human being, to do the one thing he couldn't do for his own family, to shield someone. So he gave the only answer he had. She didn't do it. Callahan's face turned a blotchy red. I'm the law here, Vance, and I say she did. Now get out of my way. Let her go, Elias said, his voice dropping low, dangerous. And I'll take all 50. Right here. You'll still get your show. The sheriff paused. He looked at the crowd, saw their bloodlust turning into something else. Fascination. This was better than whipping a native girl. This was a spectacle. The crazy widower defending a savage. It was a story they'd tell for years. And humiliating Elias Vance would be a far better warning to anyone else who thought about questioning his authority. Fine, Callahan spat, that cruel smile returning. Have it your way, you fool. Let everyone here see that Elias Vance values an Indian's life more than his own skin. He nodded to his deputy. Cut her loose. The deputy, a young kid with nervous eyes, fumbled with the ropes. The woman stumbled forward, rubbing her raw wrists, her eyes still locked on Elias. He gave her the slightest nod. Go. She hesitated, 1,000 questions in her eyes. Then she was gone, melting into the crowd like a shadow. Elias turned and faced the post. He didn't hesitate. He unbuttoned his work shirt, his hands steady, and let it fall into the dust. He placed his palms on the rough wood, the afternoon sun hot on his bare skin. He could feel every eye in town on his back. He closed his own eyes, and for just a second, all he could feel was Hannah's hand in his. Then the world exploded in fire. The first lash felt like a hot poker laying a line of pure agony across his shoulders. He bit back a cry, tasting blood. The crowd roared. The second lash landed lower, crossing the first. The pain was absolute. It was a white-hot flash that burned away thought, memory, everything. He just held on. He lost count. The world shrank to a simple, brutal rhythm. The whistle of the whip, the sickening crack against his skin, and the roaring in his ears. The cheers of the crowd slowly faded, replaced by a stunned, uneasy quiet. This wasn't a show anymore. This was a man being systematically flayed alive, and he wasn't making a sound. He focused on the splintery wood under his hands, on the rasp of his own breathing. He would not scream. He would not give them the satisfaction. At some point, the pain became a distant thing, a tide pulling him under. His knees buckled, but he locked them. His vision turned red. He was vaguely aware of a new voice cutting through the haze. That's enough, Callahan. My God, man, you'll kill him. It was Dr. Blackwood, the town's physician. The whipping stopped. The sudden silence was as shocking as the blows had been. Elias felt his hands slide down the post. The world tilted sideways and dissolved into black. He came to in the back of a wagon, every jolt a fresh wave of agony. Dr. Blackwood was at the reins, his face a mask of cold fury. Town of bloodthirsty fools, the doctor muttered. Hold on, son. I'm taking you home. The journey was a nightmare. By the time they reached his cabin, Elias was shivering, soaked in a cold sweat. The doctor, stronger than he looked, helped him inside and onto his cot, face down. This is going to hurt, Amos said softly. But if we don't clean these wounds, the infection will kill you for sure. Elias gritted his teeth as the doctor cleaned the crisscrossed gashes with carbolic acid. It was a new kind of fire, a vicious, cleansing burn. Amos then slathered a thick, pine-smelling salve over his back and wrapped him in clean bandages. That was the bravest, most foolish thing I've ever seen, Elias, the doctor said, his voice thick with a strange mix of admiration and worry. Elias couldn't answer. The doctor left, and the terrible silence of the cabin rushed back in, heavier than ever. He lay there drifting on a sea of pain, fever creeping in at the edges of his mind. He was alone, completely vulnerable, or so he believed. Sometime the next day, through the fog of fever, he felt it. Not a sound, not a sight, just a change in the air. A floorboard creaked, so softly he thought he'd imagined it. Then a new smell, fresh wood smoke. The fire in his hearth, long dead, had been rekindled. He tried to lift his head, but the pain and dizziness were too much. He must have passed out again. When he woke, a tin cup of cool water was on the floor beside his cot, right where he could reach it. The fire was burning low and steady, pushing back the chill. He drank, the water a miracle on his cracked lips. He wasn't alone. For the next few days, the pattern held. He would wake from fever dreams to find the fire tended, a small bowl of thin, warm broth on the table, his water bucket full. He never saw who was doing it. A ghost, a prairie angel. But he had a feeling he knew who it was. Then, in a moment of clarity, he saw her. The Lakota woman. She moved through his small cabin with a silent grace, her face impossible to read. She saw him watching, her dark eyes meeting his for a single, long moment. And then she slipped out the door as quietly as she'd entered. She never spoke. Never. But when the fever was at its worst, when his mind was lost in the haze, he was sure he felt gentle hands cleaning his wounds, changing the bandages, applying not just the doctor's salve, but something else. A cool, green-smelling poultice of crushed leaves that seemed to pull the fire from his skin. It was her care, methodical and distant, that was keeping him from the brink. The fever finally broke. One morning, the sunlight streaming through the window felt clean and sharp. The pain in his back was no longer a fire, but a deep, throbbing ache. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, his muscles screaming. He looked toward the door, expecting it to be empty. It wasn't. Standing just outside his cabin, framed by the morning light, were 7 women. The woman he knew, his silent nurse, stood at the front. Behind her were 6 others, from a young girl to an old woman whose face was a beautiful, intricate map of wrinkles. They were all dressed in traditional buckskin, their faces serene, their eyes watching him. Just watching. A cold spike of fear shot through Elias, the kind of primal fear he hadn't felt since the day he found Hannah burning with fever. Was this a trap? Was this some other kind of payment? He tried to push himself up higher, a pathetic defensive gesture. The woman he'd saved took a step forward, holding up a hand. "Do not be afraid," she said. Her English was careful, precise. It was the first time he'd heard her speak. "We have not come to harm you." Ellis sagged back down, his heart hammering. Who are you? What do you want?" "My name is Winona," she said. "These are my mother, my aunts, my sisters. We have come to speak." The old woman, the matriarch, stepped forward. She looked at Elias, and he felt as if she could see every scar on his soul. She spoke in the Lakota tongue, a soft, flowing sound. Winona listened, then she turned back to Elias, her face serious. "My mother, Istas, says you have done a thing for which there is no word in your language. You, a white man, took the whip for one of our people. You took her shame. You took her pain. You made it your own. This is an act of honor that has shaken the world." Elias just stared, completely lost. I just did what I thought was right." "What is right for your people is to watch us suffer," Winona said, and a flash of old anger lit her eyes for a second. "What you did was not right. It was sacred. You have created a debt, a great imbalance in the spirit world." "I don't want anything," Elias said, shaking his head. "There's no debt." Winona looked at her mother, a silent conversation passing between them. She took a deep breath. "It is not about what you want," she said. "It is about what must be. A debt like this cannot go unpaid. To do so would bring misfortune on us all. An act of kinship must be answered with kinship. An act of family," she paused, her gaze steady, "must be answered by making family." The silence in the cabin was so complete, Elias could hear his own blood pounding. "My people have counsel. My family has decided. We have come to honor you. In the only way that can balance this debt." She looked him straight in the eye. "We have come to offer you a wife." Elias felt the air leave his lungs. "A wife?" He looked from Winona's deadly serious face to the solemn expressions of the other women. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a trick. This was real. You want me to marry one of you?" He stammered, his mind reeling. "No," Winona said, and for the first time, her eyes dropped to the floor. "They offer me." The world tilted again. Elias forced himself to a sitting position, ignoring the fresh agony that tore across his back. He swung his legs over the side of the cot. He was dizzy, weak, and now completely and utterly terrified. "No," he croaked. "Absolutely not, I can't." He felt the energy in the room shift. It wasn't anger, it was something else. A deep, profound stillness. "Winona, I am grateful for your care," he said, trying to make them understand. "But I cannot marry you. I'm not a husband. Not anymore." He gestured around the empty cabin, a room haunted by ghosts. "My wife, my son, they're gone. The man I was died with them. What's left? It's not enough for anyone." He looked at her, pleading. "I didn't do it for a reward. There is no debt." Winona listened, then spoke quietly to her mother in Lakota. The old woman replied, her voice soft but firm. "My mother says you speak of your heart's sorrow," Winona translated, her eyes meeting his once more. "We understand sorrow. My husband, my son. They were lost 2 winters ago, taken by the coughing sickness that came from the fort. The same sickness, the same winter." The revelation hit Elias like a physical blow. He wasn't looking at a stranger anymore. He was looking at a mirror, a fellow survivor from the barren land of grief. "She says your spirit is wounded, just as your back is wounded," Winona continued. "And a person cannot heal alone. It is not our way. You took my physical pain. Now, it is my place to help carry your spiritual pain. This is the balance. Marriage is the word for it. It means I will stay. I will tend your fire. I will share the work. It does not mean you must forget those you have lost. It means you will not be lost with them." Before Elias could even process this, a new sound shattered the morning quiet. Hoofbeats, the rattle of a wagon, and a voice loud and ugly that made his blood run cold. "Vance, I know you're in there, and I know you've got squatters with you." Sheriff Callahan. The serene calm in the cabin evaporated. The women became statues, their bodies coiled with a sudden defensive tension. A white-hot fury surged through Elias, burning away his pain and confusion. Callahan had come to his home, to this place. "Stay inside," Elias ordered in a low voice. He used the wall to haul himself to his feet, swaying as his vision tunneled. He grabbed the hickory walking stick the doctor had left him and limped to the door. He stepped into the sun, blinking. Callahan was on his horse, a rifle resting across the saddle. His nervous deputy was right behind him. "Sheriff," Elias said, his voice like stone, "this is private property." "Not when it's harboring vagrants," Callahan sneered, nodding his head toward the women gathered in the doorway behind Elias. "I'm giving you one chance, Vance. Send them packing, or I'll arrest the whole lot for trespassing, and you for helping them." Elias looked back at Winona, at her mother. He saw their quiet dignity, their unbreakable strength. Then he looked at the sheriff, a man whose power was built on fear and hate, and in that instant everything became clear. Grief had made him a ghost, but the whip had woken him up. He turned back to Callahan, planting his walking stick in the dirt like a flag. He stood taller, the pain in his back a distant echo. "They are not vagrants," Elias said, his voice ringing out with a power he didn't know he had. "They are my family." He glanced back at Winona, saw shock and astonishment in her eyes. He took a half step to the side, putting himself fully between the sheriff and the women. It was a declaration. "And this woman," he said, his voice dropping, each word a stone thrown at the sheriff, "is my wife." Callahan's face went from red to purple. He looked like he was about to choke on his own rage. He had come here expecting to kick a dog that was already down. Instead, the dog was standing up, and it was baring its teeth. "Your wife?" He spat the word like it was poison. "You've really lost your mind, Vance. Choosing them over your own kind." "They've shown me more kindness in a few days than I've seen in this town in 2 years," Elias shot back. He could feel Winona and the other women behind him, a silent wall of support. He wasn't just one man anymore. Callahan's eyes narrowed into slits. This wasn't just about trespassing now. This was about defiance. This was about a man who was supposed to be broken, a man who was supposed to be an outcast, suddenly drawing a line in the sand. And Callahan couldn't allow that. "This isn't over," the sheriff snarled, his hand tightening on his rifle. "This land will be cleansed of you and your kind. You mark my words." He wheeled his horse around, the deputy scrambling to follow, and they rode off in a cloud of dust and threats, leaving a heavy silence behind them. Elias stood there, his body screaming in protest, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. He finally turned, leaning heavily on his stick, and faced the 7 women. He looked at Winona. Her face was a storm of unreadable emotions: shock, confusion, and something else. Something he couldn't quite name. The old woman Istas stepped forward and spoke in her language. Winona translated, her voice barely a whisper. "My mother asks if your words were true." Elias met her gaze. He had said it to provoke Callahan, to protect them. It was a lie born of desperation, but as he looked at her, standing there in his doorway, a survivor just like him, the lie suddenly felt different. It felt like a shield, maybe even a promise. "Yes," Elias heard himself say. "It's true." A ripple of quiet conversation moved through the women. Istas nodded slowly, a deep, knowing look in her ancient eyes. But Winona just stared at him, searching his face. He had just bound himself to her, a total stranger, in the most profound way possible, all to spite a man he hated. The weight of what he'd done began to settle on him. What now? They stood there in a strange, unspoken truce. He, a broken homesteader; her, a woman running from a different kind of pain, and a lie hanging in the air between them that was now somehow their only truth. The other women eventually departed, melting back into the prairie as silently as they had appeared, leaving only Winona and her mother. Istas gave Elias a long, steady look, then placed a hand on her daughter's arm, whispered something, and followed her sisters. Now it was just the 2 of them, alone, in the quiet cabin that was suddenly too small. "You should not have done that," Winona said, her first word since the sheriff left. Her voice was flat. "He is a dangerous man. You have made him your enemy." "He was already my enemy," Elias said, limping back to his cot. "He just didn't know it yet." He sank down, the adrenaline fading, leaving only the deep, grinding pain. "Why?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Why did you say that? About me being your wife?" Elias stared at the rough-hewn logs of his cabin wall. He thought of Hannah. He thought of his vow to her, a vow that now felt like it belonged to another lifetime. "I don't know," he admitted, the answer raw and honest. "It was the only thing I could think of to make him stop, to give you the protection of my name." "A white man's name," she said, and there was no bitterness in it, just a statement of fact. "It is a powerful shield and a powerful cage." She moved about the cabin, her motions fluid and efficient, checking the fire, refilling his water. She wasn't acting like a guest. She was acting like someone who belonged there. The silence stretched, filled with unspoken questions. He had taken 50 lashes for her. He had declared her his wife. He had made an enemy of the most powerful man in the county for her, and he didn't even know her. He didn't know why she was in that store. He didn't know what Donovan had accused her of stealing. He had acted on pure, blind instinct. But instinct wasn't enough anymore. "Winona," he said, his voice low. She paused, her back to him. "That day in town, the calico. Did you take it?" She turned slowly, her dark eyes pinning him to the cot. She was silent for a long moment, and in that silence, Elias felt a cold dread creep into his gut. What if he'd been wrong? What if he'd sacrificed his body and his future for a common thief? Her expression was unreadable, a mask of stone, and then she finally spoke. "No," she said, "I did not take the calico." Elias felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made him dizzy. "But," she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I was in that store to take something else, something far more valuable." Elias pushed himself up, ignoring the protest of his muscles. "What? What was it?" Winona moved closer, her eyes scanning the windows as if she expected Callahan to be listening. "Not what, where. Under the counter, where Mr. Donovan keeps his shotgun, there is a loose floorboard, and under that floorboard is a book." "A book?" Elias asked, confused. "What kind of book?" "A ledger," she said, the word sharp. "It is bound in dark green leather, and inside Mr. Donovan writes down all his real business. The supplies he sells to the fort, the grain he buys from the homesteaders, and the payments he makes to Sheriff Callahan. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with his fever. Payments? For what? For looking the other way, Winona explained. My people trade furs and beadwork for supplies. Donovan has two sets of prices, one for the white folk and the official prices he records. The other, much higher, is for us. He has been cheating my people for years. But it is worse than that. He and the sheriff, they are working together. They are using false debts to take land from homesteaders who can't pay. It is all in that book, names, dates, amounts. It is the proof of all their crimes. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. The fake accusation, the public punishment. It wasn't about a bolt of cheap cloth. It was about sending a message. Callahan and Donovan were running the whole county like their own personal kingdom, and Winona had stumbled right into the middle of their rotten scheme. She had been trying to get the one thing that could burn their kingdom to the ground. I saw him put the book there once, when he thought no one was watching, she continued. I was trying to create a distraction to get my hands on it, but he saw me. He grabbed the calico and started shouting. It was easier to accuse me of being a simple thief than to admit what I was really after. So the whipping, Elias began. It was a warning, she finished. To me, to my people, to stay away, to know our place. Elias leaned back, his mind racing. This was so much bigger than one man's grief or one woman's honor. This was a sickness that had infected the entire town, and the rot went all the way to the top. His own isolation, his own sorrow had blinded him to it. He'd been so lost in his own past that he hadn't seen the evil growing right under his nose. And now he was married to it. Or at least he'd told the devil himself that he was. He looked at Winona, really looked at her, and saw not just a survivor, but a warrior. She had been fighting this battle alone. We have to get that book, Elias said, the words coming out before he'd even fully formed the thought. A new kind of fire was starting to burn inside him, a cold, hard fire that had nothing to do with fever. It was rage, pure and simple. Winona looked at him, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. How? She asked. Donovan's store is a fortress, and Callahan watches everything. After what you did, they will be watching you most of all. Then we have to be smarter than them, Elias said. The door creaked open, and both of them flinched. Dr. Blackwood stood there, his medical bag in hand. He took in the scene, Elias sitting up, Winona standing near the hearth, and a slow, weary smile touched his lips. Well, the doctor said, closing the door behind him, this is a complication I hadn't anticipated. The doctor's eyes held no judgment, only a deep, tired wisdom. He looked from Elias to Winona and back again. I heard what you told Callahan, he said quietly. The whole town is buzzing about it. Elias Vance taking a Lakota wife. He set his bag down. Is it true? Elias and Winona exchanged a look. What was the right answer? What was the safe answer? Before Elias could speak, Winona answered for them. We are bound, she said, her voice steady. It wasn't a yes or a no. It was something else. A statement of fact. The doctor nodded, accepting it. Then you've both just made your lives 100 times more difficult. Callahan won't let this go. He sees this as a personal insult. He will look for any excuse to come after you. He began to unwrap the old bandages on Elias's back. Elias braced himself for the pain. You need to be careful, the doctor murmured, his voice low enough that only Elias could hear. Callahan is more dangerous than you know. He's not just a bully, Elias. He's a killer. The doctor's words hung in the air, cold and heavy. What do you mean? Elias asked, his voice tight. Dr. Blackwood finished applying a fresh coat of salve, his movements precise and practiced. He straightened up, his face grim. I'm only going to say this once, and then you and I will never speak of it again. You understand? Elias nodded. The doctor took a deep breath. The winter your family died, he began, his voice barely a whisper. The diphtheria outbreak was bad, but it wasn't the worst I've ever seen. There was a new treatment, an antitoxin. I'd read about it in a medical journal. I had a chance to get some. A supply was being delivered by train to Bismarck, a 2-day ride from here. Elias felt his heart clench. Why didn't you go? Dr. Blackwood wouldn't meet his eyes. He stared at the floor, his hands clenched into fists. I tried. I had my horse saddled and ready, but Sheriff Callahan stopped me. He said the roads were too dangerous, that there were reports of hostile natives in the area, and he was quarantining the town for our own safety. He wouldn't let me leave. He quarantined the town? Elias was stunned. He'd been so consumed by his own grief he hadn't known. He'd just assumed nothing could be done. There were no hostiles, Elias, the doctor said, finally looking up, his eyes burning with a 2-year-old rage. It was a lie, a complete fabrication. I argued with him. I begged him. I told him people would die. Your Hannah, your Thomas. They had a chance, but he wouldn't budge. He confined me to town by his authority. But why? Elias choked out the word. Why would he do that? Because of your land, the doctor said, his voice flat and dead. Your homestead has the only year-round creek in this part of the county. The railroad is planning a new spur line, and they need a reliable water source for the steam engines. A survey came through a month before the sickness hit. Callahan and Donovan knew where the railroad wanted to build their water tower. Right where your house now stands. They were trying to buy you out, remember? Elias remembered. He'd received a ridiculously low offer from a land company he'd never heard of, an offer he'd laughed at. They figured if you were gone, the doctor said, his voice cracking with guilt and anger, the land would go to the county for auction, and they'd be the only bidders. Callahan didn't just let your family die, Elias. He murdered them, as surely as if he'd held a pillow over their faces. The world went silent. The crackling of the fire, the whisper of the wind, his own breathing, it all disappeared. There was only a roar, a white, blinding roar of rage and grief, so immense it threatened to tear him apart. It wasn't a fever. It wasn't fate. It was murder. The man who had whipped him, the man who had threatened him, was the same man who had signed his family's death warrant. The grief that had been a dull, constant ache for 2 years was instantly burned away, replaced by something razor-sharp and diamond-hard. Justice. No, not justice. Vengeance. He must have made a sound, a choked animal noise, because Winona was suddenly at his side, her hand on his arm. Her touch was a steady anchor in the hurricane of his rage. He looked from her face to the doctor's. They both knew. They had seen the truth in his eyes. The ledger, Elias said, his voice a rasp. Does it mention the railroad? The doctor's eyes widened. What ledger? Winona was trying to steal a ledger from Donovan's store. It has records of his payoffs to Callahan. Dr. Blackwood sank onto a nearby stool, his face pale. My God, he whispered. If that's true, if that book links them together and mentions the railroad land deal, it's the key to everything. It wouldn't just be a local matter. The railroad has federal protection, proving they conspired to steal land intended for the railroad. That would bring in the marshals. That would be enough to hang them both. They sat in silence for a moment, the three of them. An unlikely alliance forged in pain and sealed by a terrible truth. A grieving husband, a native warrior, and a guilt-ridden doctor. We have to get that book, Elias said again, but this time it wasn't a suggestion. It was a vow. They'll be expecting it now, Winona said. Donovan might have even moved it. Then we have to make him move it back, the doctor said, a new steely resolve in his voice. We need to make them feel safe. Make them think the danger has passed. Elias looked at Winona. Their sham marriage, his desperate lie, had suddenly become the perfect cover. Callahan expects me to be a broken man, hiding in my cabin with my new wife, Elias thought aloud. He expects you, he said to Winona, to be a frightened woman, grateful for shelter. So we give them what they expect, she finished, understanding immediately. We act defeated. We act married. A strange look passed between them. The plan was simple. For the next week they would play their parts. Elias would be the recovering invalid. Winona would be the dutiful wife. She gathered herbs, tended a small garden, mended his clothes. He chopped wood, limped around the property, avoiding everyone. They spoke little, but a silent understanding grew between them. They were two actors in a play, waiting for their moment. The doctor helped, spreading rumors in town about Elias's pathetic state. "Poor man's completely lost it," he'd say at the saloon. "Barely speaks a word. That Lakota woman runs the house now. Sad thing to see." It worked. Callahan, seeing Elias avoid town, seeing him acting like a hermit, grew confident. The threat was neutralized. The crazy widower had crawled back into his hole. Donovan, reassured by the sheriff, relaxed his guard. They thought they had won. They had no idea the war was just beginning. One evening, as the sun bled across the prairie sky, Winona's mother, Istas, appeared at the cabin door. She carried a small, leather-wrapped bundle. She and Winona spoke in quiet Lakota, and then she presented the bundle to Elias. Inside were two items: a necklace of polished bone and turquoise beads, and a small carved wooden bird. "It is a wedding gift," Winona explained, her voice soft. "A blessing for our home." Elias took the gifts, his hands clumsy. The lie had taken on a life of its own. It had roots now. It had blessings. "Istas says," Winona continued, "that a man who fights for another's family deserves a family of his own. She says, the lie you told is now a truth in the eyes of the spirits, that you are now under our family's protection, and we are under yours." Elias looked at the old woman's wise, kind face. He looked at Winona. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was bigger. It was about protecting this new, strange, unexpected family. The next day, the doctor arrived with a message. "There's a circuit judge arriving in 2 weeks," he said. "He's the law here, above Callahan. If we are going to act, it has to be before he leaves. We need that ledger to present to him." The deadline was set. They had less than 2 weeks to unearth a secret that could get them all killed. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He stood outside the cabin, staring up at the sea of stars. The plan they had was fragile, dangerous. "You cannot do this alone," a voice said from the doorway. "Winona." "I am not alone," he said. "We need more than just the three of us," she said. "We need a diversion. Something big enough to pull Callahan and his deputy out of the town and keep Donovan distracted." "What kind of diversion?" She stepped out into the moonlight. "My people," she said, a faint, determined smile on her face. "Callahan is so worried about the enemy in his town, he has forgotten about the ones in the hills, and they have not forgotten him." The plan was audacious. It was dangerous, but it was their only shot. Winona disappeared for 2 days. She returned at dusk on the second day, her expression calm, but her eyes held a new fire. "It is done," she said. "3 nights from now, on the new moon. Be ready." The next 3 days were the longest of Elias's life. He and Winona fell into a comfortable routine, two people orbiting a shared, unspoken purpose. He found himself watching her, the way she moved, the quiet competence in her hands as she worked. She was strong, not just in spirit, but in a way he hadn't seen before. She was a survivor, and he was drawn to that. One evening, she was cleaning a small cut on his hand from a splintered piece of firewood. Her touch was gentle, practiced. "Your wife," she said quietly, not looking up. "Hannah. The doctor told me her name." Elias froze. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in 2 years. "Yes," he managed to say. "She was. Kind. She loved this land." "It is good land," Winona said, "but it holds bad memories." "They're not all bad," he heard himself say. And for the first time, when he thought of Hannah and Thomas, the sharp edge of pain was softer. It was still there, a part of him, but it was joined by something else. A flicker of warmth, a sense of duty to the living, not just the dead. The night of the new moon arrived, cloaked in an inky, starless black. The air was still, tense. Elias and Dr. Blackwood met at the edge of his property. The doctor had his horse and buggy, his medical bag sitting on the seat. "Are you sure about this, Elias?" Amos asked, his voice tight with nerves. "Once we start, there's no turning back." "I've been sure since the moment you told me the truth," Elias said. His back still ached, a constant reminder of what Callahan had done. But now it was also a reminder of what he was fighting for. They waited. The minutes stretched into an hour. The silence of the prairie was absolute. And then a faint orange glow appeared on the horizon. to the north. It grew brighter, flickering against the dark sky. A fire, a big one. Minutes later, a rider came galloping down the road from the direction of the fire. His horse lathered. He was shouting as he flew past Elias's homestead towards town. "Fire! The old Miller Ranch is on fire! We need help!" That was the signal. Winona's cousins had set a controlled blaze at an abandoned homestead 5 miles north of town. It was big enough to cause panic, but far enough away that it posed no real threat to anyone. It was the perfect diversion. They watched as lights began to flicker on in Redemption Creek. Shouts echoed in the distance, and then the unmistakable sound of Sheriff Callahan barking orders. A posse was being formed. Just as Winona had predicted, Callahan and his deputy mounted up and led a group of townsfolk riding hard towards the glow in the north. The bait was taken. "That's our cue," the doctor said. "Let's go." They rode the buggy into town, leaving it at the doctor's office. The main street was mostly empty, the chaos of the fire having drawn most people away. But the saloon was still lit, and a few men milled about. Donovan's mercantile was dark, but a single lamp burned in the back room upstairs. He was home. "I'll handle Donovan," the doctor said. "You know what to do." Elias nodded, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was no longer a farmer. He was a thief in the night, a soldier in a silent war. He slipped into the alleyway behind the store, his body hugging the shadows. He moved to the back door, his calloused hands surprisingly nimble as he worked the simple lock with a piece of wire he'd brought. It clicked open. He was in. The store was dark and smelled of dust, leather, and coffee beans. He moved silently, every creak of the floorboards sounding like a gunshot in the tense quiet. He made his way to the front, behind the long wooden counter. He knelt down, his fingers searching for the loose board Winona had described. He found it. A single board, its edges worn smooth. He pried it up with the tip of his knife. His fingers brushed against something hard and cool. Leather. He pulled it out. The green ledger. It was heavier than he expected. He held in his hands the proof of everything. The key that could set them free or get them killed. Just as he was about to stand up, he heard footsteps on the floorboards upstairs. Donovan. He must have heard something. Elias froze, his blood turning to ice. The footsteps moved toward the top of the stairs that led down into the store. He had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. He was trapped. Then he heard a frantic knocking at the front door of the store. "Mr. Donovan! Mr. Donovan! Are you in there?" It was Dr. Blackwood. The footsteps upstairs stopped, then changed direction, moving towards the front of the building. Elias heard a window slide open. "Doctor? What is it? What's all the commotion?" Donovan's reedy voice called down. "It's Old Man Hemlock!" The doctor shouted, his voice filled with practiced urgency. "His heart's given out from all the excitement. I need my other bag. I left it at your place earlier. Can you let me in?" It was a brilliant lie. Donovan grumbled, but his greed outweighed his caution. He knew the doctor would pay him handsomely for a late-night call. The footsteps retreated from the stairs. Elias didn't wait. He clutched the ledger to his chest, slipped back through the store, and out the back door, melting into the shadows of the alley just as he heard the bolt on the front door slide open. He met the doctor back at his office 10 minutes later, his heart still racing. Amos was pale but grinning. "Worked like a charm," he said. "Donovan is so cheap he didn't even want to come downstairs. He threw the bag out the window to me." Elias placed the ledger on the doctor's examination table. "Let's see what we've got." They lit a lamp and opened the book. The pages were filled with Donovan's spidery, cramped handwriting. It was all there. Every crooked deal, every inflated price charged to the Lakota, every bribe paid to Sheriff Callahan. And then on a page near the back, they found it. A series of entries under the heading, Railroad Acquisition. It detailed the plan. The lowball offer made to Elias. And then a single damning entry, dated just before the diphtheria outbreak. It read, "Callahan assures quarantine. Vance property will be ours by spring." The doctor stared at the page, his face ashen. "There it is," he whispered. "Proof. Cold, hard proof." But as Elias scanned the page, his eyes caught something else. Another name. A name he recognized but couldn't place. A payment made to a man named J. Miller. "Miller?" Elias said aloud. The old Miller ranch is the one that burned tonight. Just a coincidence, from the doctor said, but he looked uneasy. No, Elias said, a cold certainty dawning on him. I've seen that name before. He flipped back through the ledger. He found another payment to J. Miller, dated 2 years ago, the week his family died. Elias felt the floor drop out from under him. The story was wrong. The whole story he'd built in his head was wrong. Callahan hadn't just let his family die by stopping the doctor. The ledger told a much darker story. The payment was listed as for services rendered, contamination. It wasn't a quarantine. It was an infection. Callahan hadn't just let the fever take his family. He had paid someone to bring it to his door. He had paid a man to murder his wife and son with a disease. The rage Elias had felt before was a flickering candle compared to the inferno that now consumed him. This wasn't about land anymore. This wasn't about money. This was about a man who had stolen his entire world from him. He closed the book, his knuckles white. It's not enough to show this to the judge, he said, his voice a low, terrifying growl. Callahan won't just be arrested. He's going to answer for what he did. To me? Before the doctor could respond, the front door of his office burst open. The nervous young deputy stood there, his face pale with panic, his gun shaking in his hand. And behind him, his face a mask of triumphant fury, was Sheriff Callahan. Well, 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 Callahan sneered, his eyes locking on the green ledger on the table. Looks like I'm interrupting a little reading party. Callahan had a nasty gash on his forehead, and his clothes were covered in soot. The fire, the perfect diversion, had been a trap. The fire was out when we got there, Callahan said, stepping into the room. Looked like it burned itself out hours ago. Funny, isn't it? Almost like someone wanted me and my men out of town for a while. His eyes shifted from the doctor to Elias, and then to the ledger. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. I knew you were trouble, Vance. I should have let that whip finish the job. The young deputy, whose name was Miller, J. Miller, looked terrified. His eyes darted between Callahan and the ledger. He was the loose end, the man who had been paid to bring sickness to Elias's door. He was the one who started the fire tonight, likely on Callahan's orders to create a fake emergency, a way for the sheriff to circle back and catch them in the act. Callahan had been one step ahead of them the whole time. Give me the book, Doctor, Callahan said, his voice calm, but his hand rested on the butt of his pistol. Dr. Blackwood stood his ground. It's over, Callahan. This book proves everything. The only thing that's over, Callahan snarled, is your little rebellion. He drew his pistol. Now for the last time, give me the book. But before he could finish, a shadow moved in the doorway behind the deputy. Winona. She moved with a speed that was almost supernatural. In one fluid motion, she brought a heavy wooden club down on the back of the deputy's head. He crumpled to the floor without a sound. Callahan spun around, startled, but it was too late. Elias launched himself across the room, not at the sheriff, but at the heavy examination table. He put all of his weight and all of his rage into it, shoving it forward. The table crashed into Callahan, pinning his legs against the wall with a sickening crack. The sheriff screamed in pain, his pistol clattering to the floor. Elias was on him in a second, his hands closing around Callahan's throat. The rage was a living thing inside him, a white-hot fire demanding blood for blood. He could feel Callahan's life pulsing under his thumbs, could see the terror in his eyes. He could end it, right here, right now. And some part of him, a dark, grieving part, screamed for him to do it. Elias, no! It was Winona's voice, sharp and clear, cutting through his red haze. He is not worth it. The justice he deserves is not from your hands. It is from the law he broke. He looked at her, standing there, fierce and proud, holding the ledger. She was right. Killing Callahan would make him a murderer, no better than the man who had destroyed his life. He wanted justice, not just revenge. Slowly, painfully, he loosened his grip. He stood up, breathing heavily, leaving Callahan gasping and broken on the floor. Dr. Blackwood retrieved the sheriff's gun and kept it trained on him. The fight was over. The circuit judge arrived 2 days later to a town in chaos. He listened to the testimony of Elias, Dr. Blackwood, and Winona. He read the ledger. The evidence was irrefutable. Sheriff Callahan and Mr. Donovan were arrested by federal marshals, their reign of terror and greed finally at an end. The young deputy, Miller, confessed to everything in exchange for a lighter sentence. He admitted to taking a blanket from a dying diphtheria patient in another county and selling it to Elias on Callahan's orders. The truth was out, all of it. The town of Redemption Creek began to breathe again. The corruption had been cut out like a cancer, and in its place something new began to grow. The land claims were re-examined. The unfair debts were forgiven. The Lakota were finally treated as equals. Things weren't perfect, but they were better. A few weeks later, Elias stood on the hill overlooking his homestead. The two simple wooden crosses were still there, but they no longer felt like anchors pulling him down into an ocean of grief. They felt like stars, guiding him. Winona came and stood beside him. They didn't speak for a long time, just watched the sun set over the vast, indifferent prairie that was slowly starting to feel like home again. "The debt is paid," she said softly. "The balance is restored." Elias looked at her, the woman he had taken 50 lashes for, the woman who had saved his life in more ways than one, the woman he had called his wife in a moment of desperate invention. "No," he said, turning to face her. "I think the debt is just beginning." He reached out and took her hand. Her fingers curled around his, strong and sure. The lie they had told the world had somehow, against all odds, become the deepest truth of their lives. They had started as two strangers, bound by violence and honor, two survivors lost in their own private winters. But together they had found a way to bring the spring. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, their two long shadows merging into one in the fading light. The house was no longer a monument to the past. It was a shelter for the future, a future neither of them had ever expected, but one they would now build together, one day at a time. Their story became a legend in that part of the country, the story of the ghost of the prairie who came back to life and the woman who showed him how. That story is a wild ride, isn't it? It shows you that sometimes the quietest people have the loudest reasons to fight. It's a reminder that true strength isn't about how much you can endure in silence, but about when you choose to finally make a stand. If you were captivated by Elias and Winona's fight for justice, and you love stories with twists you never see coming, then you're in the right place. Do me a favor and absolutely demolish that subscribe button, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next incredible story. Thanks for watching.